Hi friends, it's Michele Mattix of Sedona Meditation Experiences, and I have a special video conversation that I'd like to share with you. This is what is the first of what I hope to be a series of conversations around ancestral healing and other healing modalities that take place on the inner awareness plane. And one of the steps involved here is tuning into your intuition, which if you've never done that before, it can be a little unsure how to proceed. So in this conversation, I'm joined with my colleague, Trish Frazzini, a fellow practitioner of ancestral healing. She and I have gone through our training together and have worked together extensively. And we are talking about the different ways that intuition has shown up for each of us in the work that we've done with our different ancestral lineages. And hearing our experiences will hopefully help you feel more comfortable about how intuition works for ancestral healing as well as other healing modalities that really take place in this inner landscape. I find meditation and mindfulness to be really beautiful tools for helping get past the noise of the mind and into a more inner healing place. So if you're interested in talking about ancestral healing, and if it's right for you, you can check the notes for how you can reach out to myself or to Trish, and we'd both be happy to talk with you as well as work with you to help you make that connection and bring the connection and healing repair to your ancestral lineages. So thanks for watching the video, and I hope you enjoy it. Trish, we've talked a lot, we've worked a lot, we've done a lot of sessions with each other, and we've talked a lot about how there's so many different ways to relate to the ancestors. I know I've done 8 different lineages, so I've had 8 different experiences with meeting the guide, and each one is a little bit different. Each one presents a slightly different story. Yeah. How has it been for you?
So I am on my 5th lineage, just started my my secondary lines, and each one has been different, and each one has its own energy and its own way of relating with me, and then even with each other. And so I've just kind of learned to stay open and trust that when they are well and wise, that you know, they know a lot more than I do about this path. And so just allowing them to do a lot of the guidance and the leading that's needed.
Yeah, so my first round, when I did my first 4 ancestral lines, I was going by the big class, you know, that Daniel 4 holds. So it was not like guided personally. It was the way he guides is for everybody in the class, which is very different than what you and I have experienced in our practitioner training and what we are starting to provide for our clients, where it's one-on-one.
Right.
And I've just found there to be a huge difference. But I'll just share the story of like the first time when I did my very first recorded session with meeting the guide that Daniel led. And, you know, I didn't know what to expect. So just listening to his instruction, and, you know, it starts by getting dropped in. So you're grounded and resourced and just in this protective, safe space. And then he just says, with the intent in your heart, you know, reach out to meet the guide. And it's just kind of sat in that space for a little while and got this image in my mind. I'm very visual, so that tends to be my first line of, you know, anything intuitive. And I saw this image of like a old, you know, prehistoric, perhaps, you know, just old warrior in armor by a creek. And the line that I was working with was of Irish descent. So I was imagining, that it would be Ireland. And it was just a creek, and I got a glimpse of his helmet, which I didn't know anything about, but it gave me something to Google later.
Oh, yeah.
And I met this guide and then asked about the questions, and it turns out he wasn't the guide. So he ended up taking me, to the one who ended up being the guide. So it happens that way sometimes. So he was my first point of contact, who then led me to meet the one who would be the guide. And I did have that visual. It wasn't like a super clear visual, like I could kind of draw the outline, but I Googled that helmet, like old Celtic helmets, and I found that exact shape helmet. So that was kind of thrilling, to have that connection to something, official.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's the confirmation that it wasn't just something. I mean, I know, we have talked about the concern people have about, are we just making this up? And I know we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit, but when you get that validation that what you're seeing is actually exists when you didn't necessarily go looking for that thing, it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, somebody called it guided Googling. where you can kind of work with, your ancestral guides or whoever your spirit guides are, and have them help you with massive information that you can Google.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Do you remember your first point of contact?
Absolutely. I remember similar kind of situation where the very first encounter was not the person or the guide or the ancestor that I was supposed to be working with. To be honest, it's been so long, I don't remember that exact encounter, but the one that I did end up working with was I was seeing a council of like these men standing around a fire at night in a sort of a snowy, icy kind of environment, very cold. And I just remember kind of watching and not sure what to make of it. And one of them came over to me, and it wasn't scary, it wasn't frightening. It was just, I was cautious, a cautious curiosity. And when I posed the questions to find out if this is who I was supposed to work with, it was. And and it was just a very interesting encounter. Similar kind of things, though, that I would have once I started working with this guide was that when I would sort of be on this journey of getting information, like a certain shape of was looking for things to put on the altar, and the certain shape of a bottle just got put right in my face. It was just like right there. And I was like, wow, that was pretty specific. And a couple weeks later, I really wasn't even looking for anything in particular. I was just sort of looking at the different bottles in the section of like alcoholic drinks, and I saw that shaped bottle, and I'm like, that's it. That's what it was. So yeah, it's just those confirmations where I think just staying open and not writing things off to say, oh, I just made that up, that didn't mean anything. My experience has been that if you just stay open, the message that they're trying to get across will become more clear. And so, yeah, it's I've had many other similar kind of encounters where, I would find, there was when I was working on my mother's line, I kept having images of a certain glass that my mom really loved. She loved certain types of, glass blowing type art and items. And I came across a glass, this red, bubbly artistic type of glass. And I was like, okay, that's what I was seeing, and I wasn't sure why. So I think that they will often send us visuals, or for some people it's maybe audio, certain words or certain mantras that might come up that might not make sense in the moment. But if we just stay open without getting too, sidetracked by it, it'll make itself known.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just great validation to just say, okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And the more we say thank you and the more gratitude we show, I think the more often those messages become even more and more clear.
Right. It's that relationship building,
Yeah.
it's honoring the connection. And
Yeah.
I got this information through this sort of inner experience, and now I'm going to go find that bottle, or I'm going to put this item on my altar. I'm going to go do the thing that they would have showed me when I was in the state. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Now, sometimes it goes a little different. Mm-hmm. So I had an experience working with a different line. This would have been my father's mother's line. Mm-hmm. And I had been doing my family tree in ancestry.com. Like, that's something I kind of go to for a while and then lay off. And mm-hmm. I had been with that recently. And so I saw pictures and I had images in my mind from that. Mm-hmm. As like the oldest picture, I forget how far back it went. And so when I'm trying to meet with the guide from this lineage, I kept seeing that picture in my mind, mm-hmm. And usually the guide is from older ago, mm-hmm. It's not one that's so recent, mm-hmm. recent enough that there'd be a photograph and you'd have their name and stuff like that. But that was the image in my mind. And so I just kind of went with it. It was like, okay, if it needs to look this way, that's how it needs to look. And just kind of let the connection form around that. Like, this is what it's going to look like. I'm not going to get hung up on why it looks this way or why it shouldn't or whatever. Mm-hmm. And instead just notice other things, like what's happening around, or what are the feelings that I get when I tune into this energy. And that was a very different one because, as I said, I'm visual. So I kind of relied on that. But then, there my vision kind of got stuck on this photograph, which, I had to kind of say, okay, that's going to be there. And I'm going to still work with this without getting hung up on that. Yeah. Have you had any experiences like that where it feels like you're pushing the image?
Yes. Yeah, I have. Similar. I was obsessed with Ancestry.com even before I heard about ancestral medicine. But I also, looking back, kind of feel like that was sort of, in a way, a calling to continue some research. And so, yeah, I was at times would, the one that really kind of sticks out for me is my great-grandmother, who was from Ireland, was my mother's father's mother. And her image just has always just made an impression on me. I don't know why. I've always just, like, there was something about her that it just drew me to her. And then when I first started the ancestral medicine path, I had a very, very vivid dream of a visit from her where she was literally walking me around the town that she moved to. It's in upstate New York, and was explaining to me why she, her family came here and things like that. So on one hand, and I wanted to connect with that ancestor, like right away, like that's the one I need to go to. And as it turns out, as I learned more about the process, that wasn't necessarily where I needed to go. I really needed to work with my primary lineages to make sure that, the proper healing and connections were in place, sort of these protocols that sometimes I think we forget about, even in, spiritual ceremonial things. We have to understand there's a respect, factor of kind of following the program. And then on the other hand, there's my other great grandmother who I have never seen a photo of. And I have looked and looked, and I've asked cousins and people, and I have nothing. So I've heard her name, and I've, been drawn by her name, but I don't have any idea what she looks like. And so, so yeah, I definitely, on both sides of that, I've gotten kind of caught up in the, being so drawn to an image, and then on the other hand, not having an image and just being so curious, but just realizing it may not exist. And so I have to be open to however she shows up for me when I get to that point.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's always such a sense of, I don't know, awe and strangely accomplishment when I make that contact with a guide. It always feels so validating.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I had a client that I was working with, and I've heard this a lot before about making things up, right? That's how do I know I'm not just making all this up?
Yeah.
And in this case, not to reveal too much about somebody's experience, but just to keep it general, she was having a hard time, with connecting with a guide. And finally, there was some connection, and we just really eased into it. And I said, what do you notice? And she said, I don't notice anything. I was like, anything at all, even if it seems like it's irrelevant.
Right.
And she said, well, I see all these old ladies in purple clothes. And I said, okay, well, let's just stay with that for a minute. And she said, but how do I know that I'm not just making that up because purple's my favorite color? And I thought that was interesting, right? Like, because how do I know I'm not just making it up?
Yeah.
And, there's a lot of ways to talk about that. But, okay, so it's your favorite color. Maybe it's your favorite color because there's an ancestral connection to this color. Or maybe they know that it's your favorite color. And so they're kind of helping to make that connection, with your imagination, your intuition, how your intuition is speaking to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. What have you noticed about that making it up part?
I've had similar concerns about that myself, especially in the very beginning. But I think the more I just stayed open to sort of like, okay, so what? What if I am making it up? Let's just see what happens. The more things started to be validated for me in ways that I could not have possibly actually made some things up. Some of these so-called coincidences and sort of the synchronicities that would start to appear in my life, I was just actually kind of blown away, where I just said, okay, it's kind of like, even though this is not a religion in and of itself, I kind of apply that concept in a few ways. Number one, how do we know anything that we connect with that is not in the three-dimensional, earth world is not completely made up, right? Including some of the myths of, various cultures that, we might say as, the Greek gods or the Greek mythologies and things like that. And yet, what is it that brings meaning for people? So some people debate whether or not Jesus even ever existed. And in some ways, so what? If he didn't, for a lot of people, this is very meaningful in their life, that they have something or someone that they feel resourced by. It's not for everyone. For others, it's Buddha or Krishna or the Great Spirit. So there's so many things on a spiritual level that we could always chalk up to making it up. But I think that the other side of that is that if we trust ourselves, if we can really trust ourselves, there are things that resonate with us that you absolutely just know in your bones to be true. You know in your bones to be real for you. That's been what this has been like for me. just more like, I know in my depths of my being that there are connections here that are not being made up in my life. And again, it also goes to other kinds of conversations, like I think you and I may have talked, and I've probably shared before, when my mom and I lived, 3,000 miles apart, I could feel that she still loved me. And maybe I wouldn't talk to her for 2 or 3 weeks at a time. But just because I didn't see her or talk to her or hear from her didn't mean that she wasn't real. And it didn't mean that she wasn't thinking of me. And as a matter of fact, how many times, how many of us have reconnected with a relative or a dear friend or someone in our past that maybe we haven't communicated for a long time, and suddenly the phone rings, or you get an email, or someone says, I was just thinking about you. I was just talking about you. I think what really resonates for me also, one of the things that Black Elk said, a Dakota medicine man said, the great illusion is that we are all separate. And so once again, I just feel like, there's so many things in nature that we could look to as an example of, what existence is like. The recycling of water, water evaporates. What does it do? It then comes back and nurtures us, and then it shows up again in different forms. Energy, we know, doesn't ever go away. Energy scientifically changes form, but it never ends. And so I think there are scientific, concepts that we accept that can also be applied to spiritual concepts that people have known to be reality for hundreds of thousands of years. And we've lost a lot of that wisdom.
Yeah, and you think about how something like inspiration comes to you. You have this amazing idea or insight, and it can change your life, right? Like that can lead you to take action that really literally changes where you live, or the job you do, or the partner you choose, or whatever. And that inspiration, it's not something that you rationally concoct. It comes to you through like intuition, right? As a vision, or just a feeling, or something. And I feel like reaching in and doing this inner work, connecting with the guide, which is really the first step of doing the lineage repair and healing work that ancestral healing is all about. It takes you deeper and deeper into your own intuition.
Yeah.
And it's going to speak to you in that similar kind of way. But instead of it being like a flash, like we think of inspiration, it's sometimes you finding the thread. Like of all the information that's coming at you at any one given time, from sound and sight and electromagnetic energy we can't even see, and just tactile, all of it. Like you find this one thread in there that's like the whispering of this ancestral lineage, and you start to be able to amplify it and tune into it and hear it, and it opens up into a real connection and a real story.
Yeah.
And so, do you have to make it up? No, like you don't make it up the way that you may make up, I don't know what, telling to someone.
Exactly. Yeah, we're not asking people to make up a story. We're just asking them to share what they're observing. Yeah. And to just trust that what they're observing means something.
Right.
Whether it's literal or figurative, but yeah.
Yeah, it's like following the white rabbit, right? Just see where it leads you.
Yeah.
It's kind of like I was thinking as you were speaking of, sometimes we have this impression in the world that there's a right way to do things and a wrong way.
Yeah.
And it's just really not that way. Like in a sense, we're always making things up. Every time we stop paying attention to the recipe and make our own soup, by a pinch of this and a handful of that. We're going off script. Or if you decide to be self-employed instead of have a job that has the structure for you, and suddenly you're going to just start making it all up yourself.
Yeah.
There's it's kind of like that with intuition. It's like the world has taught us this is what's real. This is what you pay attention to. And when you do inner work, like ancestral healing work, it's saying, okay, but there's still this inner world.
Yeah.
And you can tap into it. It just means you're going to have to go beyond what society tends to put its stamp of approval on in terms of real, not real.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's one that comes up a lot, you know. I experienced that first experience I shared with the pointy helmeted person that showed up in my connection.
Mm-hmm.
He ended up taking me to the one that was the guide.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly enough, it was one that I had seen before.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm a meditator, and I was going through a pretty rough time, meditating a lot, you know, doing a lot of just self-soothing through meditation. And in one of those sessions, I saw, you know, like this wasn't common for me at that time, but I saw this grandmother, and I was in her kitchen, and this was like an old kitchen, you know, and she was just like tending to whatever she was tending and let me be there. Like I was in my meditative space, but I had that comfort of like being a child sitting in, you know, grandma's kitchen while she's preparing dinner and feeling her love hold the space and let me be there, but not necessarily entertaining me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I saw her in my meditations a few times. And then fast forward a couple of years when I was introduced to this work and had that experience, this one took me to her and said, this is the guide. And it ended up, she was an ancestral grandmother on my lineage. I just had no clue of it before.
Right, right.
But I wanted to share that because sometimes this stuff isn't unfamiliar.
Right.
You maybe have not thought about it in context of ancestors and, you know, the story that you've inherited from your ancestors. But like almost every time that I've made a connection, I'm like, oh my God, that's why I was attracted to that painting, or oh my God, this is like what I love to do, or I've thought about this before. It's just been a long time. And now I see it's part of this connection to these people.
Yeah.
Very rarely is it just like totally brand new, like, oh my gosh, where did this come from?
Right, right.
Have you found that to be true? Like you recognize some of the things that you experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, you know, I've been interested in meditation and spirituality and sort of what we would call, you know, non-traditional religious paths or non what do they call sort of not organized religion. You know, I was raised Catholic, and even on what really attracted me, or I think what I really appreciated about the Catholic religion, was the mysticism part of it, which they're not always very overtly teaching us, you know, but also understanding that there is this richness to many religions that go beyond the we'll preach and you obey, you know, kind of a thing. So, you know, I've been on this path of searching and searching and searching really kind of my whole life, I feel like. And all of this, and I've had some wonderful experiences and amazing opportunities to learn from some, you know, wisdom keepers and people who just absolutely, you know, are in touch and connected with something much greater than what we see. And when I came across this ancestral medicine piece, it answered so many questions, and it filled in the blanks. So for instance, you know, I learned at age 16, oh, we have spirit guides. Well, that's really cool. Let me go to a psychic and have the psychic tell me, what does my spirit guide want me to know? And then as we went, and, my mom and I would, kind of go to these psychic fairs, and we'd make appointments and, see a couple people. And then one day, one of the people that we saw on a regular basis said, no, we're not going to do that. Like, I'm not going to speak for your guides. I'm not going to tell you what you guides want. And I was kind of like, well, that's disappointing. How am I going to know? And, and I've always felt, I had experiences of, I'll tell you probably my most profound experience I had when I was very little. I was probably maybe 4 years old. And I woke up in the middle of the night and I saw this woman standing over me. It was not a dream. It was very, very vivid, very concretely real. This woman basically made of light, who in my mind looked like my mom, who was alive. And I thought, oh, mom's here. And she was praying over me. And I went into my mom's room the next morning and I said, Mommy, why were you standing over my bed praying over me last night? She's like, I wasn't in your room last night. And that always just stuck with me. I was confused as a little kid. It took many, many years for me to realize, oh, that was obviously a spirit guide, right? And then it took me a few decades to figure out that was a grandmother. That was a loving, ancestral person who was loving me and praying for me and watching over me, because I had that very maternal, instinct from this person. And so come full circle after all these years, I started to realize that the ancestral piece of healing our lives and helping our ancestors to heal their lives, and I don't mean just their earthly life, but have all of our souls be interconnected and healed and ancestralized, basically, really is the end game, because that's where I want to be when it's my time to be on that side of the veil. That I'll be in a, not just, well accepted by my ancestors because we have a relationship already, but then to my descendants and those people who I love, who I've left behind, to know how to help and interact with them in a way so they'll always know, like that 4-year-old little girl knew, I had somebody who had my back. I had somebody who loved me, who was watching over me, and who actually allowed me to just have that brief encounter with her. So I'm not saying I want to go and obviously haunt people or show up, in a way that's going to freak them out at 4 years old. But yeah, for me, it's just like, it just brings a whole lifetime of searching to this point of, oh, this is what it's about. For me, this is what it's about. This makes so much sense. And so, we certainly don't have time for me to go through all of the different ways that, that this answers so many questions.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I just, I'm enthusiastic about it. Try not to be evangelical about it, because it is kind of, for some people out there, and yet I think once we learn more about how our ancestors conducted ancestor reverence and looked to their predecessors for how to live life, it just makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. It's just history that's been lost, and now we're reconnecting with our own histories and traditions in a very loving, supportive way.
That's really beautiful. It's a beautiful story. It's like, when I grew up, I want to be an angel.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, an angel who happens to be an ancestor.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Now, you and I are both visual. So we've got that similar go-to, but a lot of people aren't.
True.
Visualization, I don't even like to call it a skill.
Mm-hmm.
It's just an ability that some people have and some people don't. And mm-hmm. I know this from my meditation work. Some people are so visual that they have a hard time distinguishing between what they've seen in a vision, mm-hmm. be it a dream or just a vision, with what's in reality. Mm-hmm. And then some people can't visualize at all. You say, visualize the globe. and nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, there's times, and I've guided people through connecting with ancestors where it's not visual. You know, they're feeling it maybe in their body somehow. Maybe they hear it. Maybe they're feeling it emotionally, just kind of riding the subtle current of how their emotion moves. I think you've had an experience like this, yeah?
Yeah. Yeah.
Would you like
You
to
broke
share
up there
that?
for a second. So that very last sentence, I wasn't completely 100% clear on. So can you repeat one more time that very last sentence?
Yeah, just that that whole somatic,
Somatic.
or let's say non-visual way of connecting with ancestors, the way that intuition is sometimes non-visual.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
would you be willing to share that story?
So yeah, I have had a situation where after I started working with my ancestors, I had an experience where I started, and again, it was also post-COVID, so I want to be fully disclose kind of where things had happened, but I had what they call syncope, where I had um, my blood pressure dropped suddenly, and I passed out, and I fell and broke 7 bones in my face. Yeah. And that happened shortly after I started working with my ancestors. And so I was kind of still in that mode of, am I making it up? I was still pretty kind of early on. And so I started working in an ancestral circle with one of the practitioners. And I started, she would have us, call in our ancestors that we had connected with. And the strangest thing started to happen, and it's the only time that it happened, is that I would feel this gentle pressure on my injury. And sometimes it would, kind of come over here. And I was like, oh, they're here. They're touching me, like, not, and I know some people are like, oh, I don't want to be touched. I don't want to see spirits. It wasn't anything creepy at all. It was just a very gentle, but I could tell it was coming from an external pressure of just gently touching. And that happened for about 2 or 3 months. Every single time I would call in my well ancestors. And I was just so grateful to have that. It was like almost like if anyone's had, a Reiki experience, it was almost like they were doing Reiki or something on my injury.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was just so grateful. And that, again, was very much validating that there was an energy. As a matter of fact, even though I'm getting older and I don't tend to heal as fast as I used to, my ear, nose, and throat doctor that's been helping me with these injuries said it was pretty remarkable how well and how quickly my face had healed. And so, I definitely see a difference, in the symmetrics of my face and things like that. But, a lot of people have remarked that, wow, you really couldn't even tell that you had an injury.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and there was no surgery done or anything because it was past that time to be able to do anything. So, and I felt like the experience of having, had that traumatic experience of being injured, and especially in such a visual place, was also a very important reminder for me about how resilient our ancestors have been through times. They've lived through atrocities, they've lived through, but they have had this healing ability to tend to each other. And I just feel like that's part of, for my ancestors, that's what they were sharing with me is, we know what's needed, and you don't have to do anything, and we'll do the healing. And you know, and so I was just very grateful for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful. And it's how a lot of people, make that first connection
Yeah.
through some physical thing. It can be very subtle,
Yeah.
like a very small tingling somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe it's a little more obvious, like a
Yeah.
pain or some sensation.
Yeah.
And it may not seem like much, like, oh, my ancestor's talking to me by making my hip hurt or whatever. But it's an entry point. It's like someone knocking on the door.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where if you slow down and just really tune into that,
Mm-hmm.
let that be like your whole mindful focus. And just what is it about that feeling? What does it bring up for you? What are you noticing around it? What is it? And sometimes that tiny little knock,
Mm-hmm.
opens a door to what can develop into a very big connection.
Yeah. Yeah. And kind of going almost kind of like where you had talked about with the image, you know, of wanting to be sort of preoccupied, you know, with an image. I started to become a little bit preoccupied with this feeling as the message that I was getting, that they were present. And that after my injury was pretty much fully healed as much as it could be, you know, it started to fade away. And so even now, if I, you know, kind of call in the ancestors, I don't have, that doesn't happen anymore. And so it's almost like they're saying that's not what's needed anymore. And so we're not going to, it's almost like, you know, don't test us, you know, like if you're here, you know, I'll know by you, you know, touching my face. And they're like, that's not how this is going to work. You know, in a very gentle and loving way, but, you know, there's been other ways that they've shown up. Now this is going to sound, again, the audio and yet physical. Often when I'm working with people in person, and I'm in this room a lot. This is where my altars are. This is where my meditations occur and my meetings and things like that with the ancestral medicine people. Often there will be, and I know it sounds very old-fashioned movie-like, but there will be like knocks on the ceiling or knocks on the wall. And my daughter has really gotten into some, you know, very deeply into some of this kind of work. And when she's in here, it exponentially, you know, like they're following her in here, and we just laugh because it's like, I'm in here so much and it doesn't happen any other time, you know, and I even when I'm listening for it, like nothing, but it happens often when we're doing the work. So again, there are ways that the energy is expressed so that we have just like a validation. Yes, we're here. Yes, we're listening. It's not like a seance kind of thing that people might imagine it to be. It's just a gentle, like, we're here and we're letting you know it. And there's nothing scary and there's nothing to fear. And we support you, you know.
And I love what you said about allowing the relationship and the ways that they do communicate to evolve. You know, sometimes that initial knock, like it's so thrilling and so cool when you like hear it. And then you sort of expect like, well, where's the knock? But, you know, when the guest arrives, they come in and, you know, you get on with other things. Like it's not always about that first point of contact.
Right. Exactly.
You allow the relationship to evolve and mature.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's one last thing, I think last, maybe not, but one other thing that I wanted to mention, which is I had this experience once connecting with a lineage, and oh my gosh, it was so interesting and confusing because the images I was getting were of a rock. So instead of meeting a human guide, I kept getting a rock, and this was like a big matrix of rock in the earth. And for like a few sessions, you know, 2 or 3 sessions, it was just about this rock. And, you know, I remember at the time we've been going through our ancestral healing practitioner training, and we got on for one of the everybody's meeting sessions. And a few of the people that I had been doing exchange sessions with, who were guiding me through this rock experience, asked questions like, what happens when you meet something that's not human? Or,
Yeah.
what's going on when it's like this? And it's like, oh, that was me. That's mine. And, I remember what Daniel said then is like, sometimes, the guides present in some other way, like maybe with something, an element or an animal or plant that your people had a relationship, an affinity with.
Yeah.
And then he said something like, sometimes people just have to get all the magical stuff out of the way first before they can really get in and make the connection.
Yeah.
So for me, it ended up like the rock held a memory. That's one of the purposes that crystals do. They can hold on to memory.
Yeah.
And then that memory ended up being kind of the foray into connecting with these ancestors.
Beautiful.
So it can work that way too. Sometimes you get, I was just reminded of that Harry Potter scene where they're going to, I don't know, the Quidditch tournament, and there's the old manky boot in the field, and it turns into the port key, like the craziest thing can be like the foray into some other place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've worked with other people who have had their ancestors show up as wind and other elements, that just like, and even as a practitioner, in training, I was not entirely sure, where to go with that. And, as I've continued, working through and trusting and often trusting the client, when I was like, okay, because in my mind, as very much a novice, I was like, oh, well, that can't be it. Like, let's just keep going. And this other person was saying, no, I really feel like we need to like talk to the wind, let's do that. And it turned out that wind then took her to her guide. So in and of itself, it wasn't the guide, but it was a way for her to connect. And so again, there's the sort of just trusting, within the whole ritual safety and boundaries of things, just knowing that it's going to be different for everybody. And it's certainly not gonna be a straight line, probably for most people in most situations. So,
and it's a journey. I mean, it's a journey of connection and rediscovering your own intuition. And where it takes you. There's no designated end point. It's the journey, really. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you can think of that we should talk about at this?
Well, I mean, offhand, I was just, kind of circling back to, you're talking about your meditation practice and, the importance of trying, I shouldn't say trying, because that also goes against some of the concept, but of being able to practice silencing our minds, because that's one thing I've had people express. I keep having all these thoughts, and they just keep, and they're just they feel like they're all over the place. And I remember, I think it was Wayne Dyer who said, in his own way, it's between our thoughts, that space between our thoughts, that God talks to us. And it was, he had this concept of the gap between thoughts. And like, if you can just find that gap and then start to expand that, it will start to be easier. And that communication, or us being receptors of some of those messages or that guidance can come through. And so I think it's similar even though we're not necessarily meditating as we go through this practice, there are those similar elements where if we can just find that pause, like even as we're thinking a thought, or saying a sentence, if we can just stop, pause, see what comes through, you know, that's been helpful for me in some ways to, I think, get more deeply in connection in my practice.
Yeah,
So,
I think that's so important. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's I do teach meditation, and I have meditated for many years. And you know, the act of meditating helps to bring you into more mindful awareness.
Yeah.
And that mindfulness is kind of one of the ways that, you know, like you don't have to get stuck up in this mess of thoughts.
Yeah.
You know, the thoughts can still be there,
Mhm.
but you are here.
Right.
And sometimes, you know, the thoughts are there too. Sometimes, like when you're meditating or dropped into that inner place,
Mhm.
you know, the thoughts are a little further away, and you're able to hear better the
Yeah.
truer thoughts, you know, the connection that you have to your intuition and to your true self.
Yeah.
And I do believe that meditation is a wonderful tool to help people get in touch with that inner space.
Absolutely.
Because this work, you know, this intuitive work, doing ancestral healing has a huge element of intuition.
Yeah.
It is really best when you've had some kind of inner work, something, you know, meditation practice, counseling, even where there's some self-inquiry and, you know, learning to kind of separate your thoughts from who you truly are.
Yeah.
Or other types of healing work. You know, there's all kinds of shaman work and different modalities that help you to separate your thoughts from who you are.
Right. Exactly.
And it is in who you are where you can more easily feel and understand or see or whatever your connection to your intuition.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you say that, when you say who you are, just reminds me that who we are is an accumulation of all of our ancestors. And so, you know, it just seems so appropriate. The more we can get in touch with who we are, we're also getting in touch with who they are, not just were, but are in the present time.
Yes.
And are as we perceive time.
Yes, that's beautifully said.
Yeah, but that's, you helped make that connection just now. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Trish. It's been a pleasure to talk with you about this and hopefully share with people who are confused, curious, wondering about how all this works. Hopefully this gives a little more understanding of how intuition can work for each individual.